Good morning. Welcome to session number 13 of Virtual OTEC 2020. This session's title is Designing Safer and Better Bike Ped Facilities. I'm Victoria LTAP Center and I'll be your technical support behind the scenes. A few housekeeping items before I turn things over to your moderator. We will be accepting questions throughout the session in the question box. And for those of you who haven't yet joined us on an OTEC session, we would ask that you please look for the question box in your GoToWebinar panel and drop us a hi or hello in there so that we know you found it. We would like for you to know this session is being recorded, and if the technology cooperates, we will post a YouTube link to the video on the OTEC site once the conference has completely finished, which will be after next Friday. Also, after next Friday, you'll be receiving a certificate for 1.5 CPDs for complete attendance at this session. If the session does run over, the certificate is not going to be modified to include any additional time. You're still only going to get the 1.5 CPDs, but we highly encourage you to stay on if it does run over. So thank you for your attention, and now I'm going to turn things over to Scott Phinney.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining OTEC and for joining session 13, which is Designing Safer and Better Bike Ped Facilities. My name is Scott Phinney. I work for ODOT. I am standing in today for Mark McCord, Dr. Mark McCord of The Ohio State University. He was originally scheduled to moderate this session. He organized it and put this incredible session together, but unfortunately had something come up at the last minute and wasn't able to moderate. So if you like the material and you like the session and you know Mark, please reach out and just congratulate Dr. McCord. So we have sort of part two today of our bike ped sessions. We had a session yesterday on planning bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Today we're going to be about designing safer and better ones. And so we have 4 presentations, and I will real quick here give you a heads up about what we're going to be seeing today. So first off is going to be Brent Bogard. He's going to be talking about our safety-based multimodal design guide. Then we're going to be turning it over to Tommy Arnold from ODOT District 8. And then third, we're going to have a tag team presentation from Jeremy Thompson and Andy Shahan. And then the anchor leg today is going to be from Mario Coleman of Tool Design Group. So with that, let's just get into it. I want to save as much time as possible for you to hear from our panelists today. So our first panelist is and presenter today is Brent Bogard. Brent is the administrator of ODOT's Office of Roadway Engineering here in Columbus at Central Office. Brent holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the Ohio State University and is a professional engineer here in Ohio. So with that, Brent, go ahead and share with us on the Multimodal Design Guide.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Scott, for the introduction, and thanks everyone who has joined the presentation this morning. As one of the co-project managers, I'll be updating you on the status and development of one of ODOT's new upcoming guides titled the Multimodal Design Guide. In this presentation, I'll give an overview of the project, its background, goals, chapter content, and deliverables, the makeup of our Technical Advisory Committee, or the TAC, and our stakeholder engagement, as well as an update on the project schedule and our next steps. So in this first section, I'll go through the overview of the project, including its background, goals, chapter content, and deliverables. In 2018, ODOT enlisted consultant support to conduct a national best practice scan of other DOTs and resources related to bicycle and pedestrian design, to audit and review agency standards, guidance, and resources, and to provide recommendations to ODOT to ensure agency resources were current and in line with national best practices. In total, 68 documents were reviewed, 5 DOTs were interviewed, and ultimately a list of 30 recommendations were made to ODOT, and the most significant recommendation was to develop a new comprehensive multimodal design guide. So the purpose of this current project is to develop that new comprehensive multimodal design guide, and this new guide will serve as a consolidated resource for bicycle and pedestrian design guidance for ODOT projects. The goals of the Multimodal Design Guide project include consolidating appropriate content from existing ODOT and national resources, incorporating existing best practice resources, and anticipating changes in future guidance in various AASHTO publications. The Multimodal Design Guide will include chapters that cover the following topics: multimodal design scoping and planning process, elements of design, ODOT accessibility guidance, pedestrian facilities, shared use paths, bicycle facilities, vehicle facilities supporting multimodal accommodation, multimodal accommodations at complex intersections, which will be covered by Mario in more detail as part of this OTEC session, the very last part of this session, signals and signs, and transit facilities. The start of the project included creating a project charter, schedule, and engagement plan. We've then worked through 4 separate workshops with our TAC and stakeholder groups, where we discussed the content that should be included in the guide and different agencies' priorities and preferences. And we are currently in the chapter development and review phase, which all feed into the final deliverable of the Multimodal Design Guide. So next, I'll talk about our TAC, or the Technical Advisory Committee, and our stakeholder engagement. So our core ODOT project team consists of Caitlin Harley in ODOT's Office of Program Management, who serves as one of our ODOT project managers, Mike Kronball, subject matter expert in ODOT's Office of Roadway Engineering, and myself as the other ODOT project manager. And our consultant team, we have Jeremy Cherzan, leading as Tool Designs project manager, Mario Coleman, Tool Designs deputy project manager, and Amy Rosepeiler, Burgess and Niples project manager. Stakeholders participated in 4 workshops that discussed multimodal design best practices for topics outlined in the scope of work. Our responsibilities included attending 4 working sessions that were held in February through May of this year. Stakeholders were asked to provide input based on their unique background and experiences during those working sessions. Stakeholders included members from ODOT districts 5, 8, and 12, the cities of Akron, Canton, Cleveland, Columbus, and Hilliard, Franklin County Engineering, Lorain County Metro Parks, NOACA, ORDC, and FHWA. And we thank all of them for their time, input, and contributions during the workshops. The role of the TAC is to provide technical feedback to the ODOT project team and consulting team throughout the development of the guide. The TAC participates in all working sessions with the stakeholder group, as well as all draft chapter reviews. Responsibilities include providing input throughout the engagement process, ensuring that stakeholder feedback is considered in the development of the guide, reviewing and commenting on the draft MDG content. The TAC consists of members with various backgrounds, roles, and responsibilities, including members from the Office of Program Management, Roadway Engineering, Traffic Operations, Environmental Services, Diversity and Inclusion, District Planning and Engineering, as well as Executive Leadership. And lastly, I'll cover the project schedule and next steps. From now through April of 2021, we will be working through the chapter development, reviews, and TAC meetings, organizing and refining the guide's content. We expect a full draft guide to be available for TAC review in June of 2021, with the final version of the Multimodal Design Guide being publicly available next fall, hopefully in August of 2021. And these dates are all subject to change depending on how quickly or slowly the draft chapter development and review process goes. So there you have it, an update on the background development, proposed content, status, and next steps in creating the Multimodal Design Guide. Thanks again for taking the time to attend this session, and the contact information for Caitlin, myself, and Jeremy are listed here on the screen. So if you have any questions, please reach out. And thank you.
Brett, this is Victoria. I'm going to jump in here real quick because a lot of folks seem to be having an issue with the video still for some reason showing for them. So I want to load that back up and do an actual exit out of it, a stop, to see if that fixes their problem. So hopefully that's going to take care of it. And then I believe it's going to Andy next, right?
I think it's Tommy.
Tommy.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to Tommy next. But before we go, I was remiss at the beginning of the session to let folks know if you have a question for any of our presenters today, just with the software that we're using, we won't be able to take you off mute and you won't be able to ask them directly. But if you have a question, we strongly encourage questions. And so we ask that you would take your question and you would type it into the chat pod. And if you could maybe let us know which presenter your question is for, that would really be helpful. So if you have a question for Brent, just go ahead and key that in and let him, we'll get to answering that towards the end. Or at any of the other speakers or presenters today, just let us know who you would like to respond to that question. So with that, we're going to keep the show rolling here. And we're going to move on to Tommy Arnold, who's going to be giving us a presentation on implementing Ohio's state and U.S. bike route system. Yesterday, we had a presentation from Kate Harley talking about the planning that went into it. And so today, Tommy's going to be talking more about the implementation of it. So just a little bit about Tommy. Tommy serves as the planning engineer for ODOT's District 8, which is a 7-county area down in the Cincinnati area. In his role, Tommy leads an award-winning staff of passionate professionals focusing on traffic safety, asset management, local public agency assistance, and environmental coordination. Tommy's got more than 17 years of service at District 8, serving in a number of roles, including project manager for the I-71 MLK interchange and segment 2 and 3 of the Eastern Corridor. He's a 2003 graduate of the University of Dayton, go Flyers, and a professional engineer, and a father of 3 kiddos, all under the age of 8. So I don't know how you have any energy at all, Tommy, but we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Scott. And I think, we may as well just call the Flyers the NCAA champions from this year. I don't know, but would have been nice to see them play. But thanks again. And I want to just pick it up from where Brent left off. Brent just shared a really cool tool that's coming for us as practitioners in the state with the Multimodal Design Guide. And today, I really have 2 topics that I'm going to share with you. But before I do that, I wanted to ask if you guys have ever seen this headline. So I'm letting this come up. Okay, so you should see this screen now. Obviously, it's been a crazy 6 months, and we've had some hard times, but it's been interesting to see how some folks have kind of found the silver lining throughout this whole process of being at home. And interestingly, in Cincinnati, this headline was out there just a few weeks ago, and it said a COVID bike boom is happening in Cincinnati, and will it last? And I don't know if it's because maybe more people are closer to home right now, and so it's easier to get out, or maybe they are kind of tired of being inside and they want to find a safe way to get out. But it seems to be that there's more active transportation going on during this time. Which is an interesting sign. And we've even had some bike shops in Cincinnati run out of bikes, which who would have believed that? So, I'm wondering if you have that in your community, something to keep an eye on. But one thing I think it shows is that some of our design guidance indicates that more than 50% of people are interested in biking, but they're concerned about it. So these are our customers as practitioners that we serve, and it's interesting to get an idea of kind of how they see things. But with this bike boom happening, they're kind of coming out and trying things out. So, it is interesting or important for us to kind of keep up with the latest design and provide those kind of services for our customers. So today I'm going to talk about 2 things. As Scott mentioned yesterday, Kate Harley provided an overview of Ohio's state and bike route system, and she got into a lot of details. And she is our, our leader as the central office Safe Routes School coordinator, and just a great advocate for bike and peds. So I'm going to talk a little bit, just do like a quick overview of some of the high points, since she covered it so well yesterday. One thing I want you to know about, that I think you need to know about, are some of the tools that are currently out there that can help you with planning and implementing bike and pedestrian type infrastructure in your community. Certainly, I'm going to be sharing at least my favorite ones. So I hope you find them useful. And then secondly, I want to answer this question. Okay, great, now what? We've got a state and U.S. bike route system, or we're hoping to have one soon. We're making a lot of progress, but what do we do now? Bike facilities are very popular, but they're kind of hard to fund. And there's a lot of questions of who's the champion and who takes the lead. So I'm going to give you some examples from Southwest Ohio. I've gotten a couple great examples from Mary Hoy, who's our Safe Routes to School coordinator in the Dayton area, District 7, as well as the DSRT chair. And I'm sure Mary wears a million other hats. So we're so lucky to have Mary on the ODOT team. And then I'll also share some examples from District 8. So I think it's helpful as we dive into this topic to discuss where we're headed as an agency. And Scott Phinney actually is playing a huge role, I believe, leading the effort on Ohio's statewide policy plan update, which is Access Ohio. And this graphic shown here, I think, is a really great vision for Ohio that's being used in that plan. And it says, all Ohio will be connected by a safe, smart, and collaborative transportation system that moves people and freight efficiently and supports community visions, to paraphrase. So to me, I think this really ties into active transportation. I mean, the connected piece of it, obviously as transportation officials and practitioners, what we're trying to do is connect people, make connection for folks. And I think interesting about walking and biking is, when you're out on a trail, how often do you maybe wave at that person, or it's not just, getting from here to there, but also connecting with people. I think that's easier to do when you're out active transportation as opposed to when you're out driving, unless you own a Jeep. I guess there's a Jeep wave. I never had one, but. And then collaborative. I mean, bike and ped facilities really require collaboration and coordination between several agencies. It's not just the typical players like ODOT, county, cities, villages, but you're also getting to work with park districts and other agencies. So definitely collaboration is so important. And then community visions. My joke is always that, I've got to work on some amazing roadway projects, new interchanges and other things like that. And nobody ever had a t-shirt, for any of those projects. But how many t-shirts do you see for folks' local trail? They're all over the place. So communities really desire these, and customers are citizens of Ohio are speaking out and asking for these types of facilities. So drilling down into our vision for the state and U.S. bike route system, it's very similar, although it dives down a little bit more. So our goal is to establish a statewide network of state and U.S. bike routes, which will provide cyclists with safe and convenient connections through and to population centers and destinations in Ohio. And I think that's important. It's not just that we're out for a ride, it's where are we going and where do people want to go? And we want to try to make those routes available for those desire lines. And all of our friends are doing this too. This is not just an Ohio thing. We are building off a nationwide effort, and some of our neighbors have already done it. So for instance, Kentucky to the south has journalized part of their state routes, our US bike route system. And so that kind of helped drive where we are setting up our alignment. This next slide is coming up. This is just a snapshot of what Ohio system will look like. We currently have US Bike Route 50 journalized across the middle of the state. It's ready to go and signed. And we are very close on the remainder of the US bike routes. So more to come soon. And it's important. It's important from a safety perspective too. As we've seen, this year, oddly enough, in 2020, travel has been down 15%, but traffic deaths are up 5%. And cyclists, bicycle crashes, fatalities are certainly something that we're keeping an eye on. But one very surprising stat is that pedestrian crashes are up more like 30% compared to last year. So, we have to pay attention to our most vulnerable users, and ODOT does a very comprehensive shot at that by through our strategic safety highway safety plan. So when you're working in your community, I think it really helps to understand your data. And so I would strongly encourage you to check out our new dashboard. We of course have all kinds of other tools, but this dashboard is amazing because you can pull up your stats and see exactly how you compare your district, your county, your community, your MPO region. How do you compare to the rest of the state? And that's so powerful because it helps you, not just on the bike ped front, but in any safety investment. It helps you kind of target and prioritize where you need to focus for your specifically tailored to your experience. TIMS is an amazing tool as well. I would strongly encourage you to check that out. I'm sure most people on the call or on this meeting have used it a million times, but there's new things there. Of course, there's the crash data in the bottom left if you want to pull crashes, but there's also a new map viewer out there that's specific for active transportation. And there's some really interesting and useful data sets that are on there. Like you can see exactly, what percentage of the state and US bike route system is what type of facility. And then we also have a new composite score, and that's out there. And you can look at a couple different versions of this that comes from Walk Bike Ohio that identifies demand versus need. So just a lot of great things out there on TIMS that I would encourage you to check out. Okay, so next we're going to go through some specific examples and answer that. Okay, great, a lot of good tools, now what? And the key points for these is, in my opinion, and what's been successful for my experience, is to look for opportunities to improve these connections with your program that you already have in the books. Preservation, paving, bridge work, or local projects that need coordination. Keep your eye out for those opportunities. Next, evaluate bike-related crash data on your system. See if you are seeing any trends, and I'll show you a quick example. Doesn't have to be super fancy, it can just be brute force. And then finally, when you find those, you can do a systematic type improvement, or maybe you find that one spot that really needs extra attention. So as we go into the, finding opportunities to line up with your work plan, I want to give you an example. So this year, District 8 has published our work plan, our multi-year work plan for the first time. And the multi-year work plan is ODOT's bread and butter, really. It is a 6-year capital plan and then a 2-year operations plan. And we update it every year. And, that's the opportunity that we have to, plan all of our work, but also look at all those other needs that are out there. And having the US and state bike route available, that's now a backbone that we can rely on it. And we know that those routes are there. And so when we're planning projects, we can review our work plan for overlaps with the state and US bike route and have the opportunity to plan for enhancements. The great thing about this tool, and the reason I've got our link here, is that if you work with a local government and you're interested in pursuing an improvement like this, you can come to our site yourself. If you're doing planning, you can see what we're thinking in the next 6 years. So it's a great tool, and I encourage you to check it out. One project that was a success for us related to that approach of coordinating with preservation was a paving project out on US 50. We had 3 villages in that area on the west side of Cincy that came to us, and they asked for a road diet. As we looked into it, there's just too much traffic volume for that. But we did identify that cyclists were out there using it, and so we were able to implement a bike lane in this area. And that was a big win for us and for the community. I think, did I just drop you or?
Nope, we still got you.
Okay.
Oh, we got you.
All right, cool. I just showed up big on my screen for some reason. Okay, so anyway, big win for us and for the communities to get the road diet in. Another example is from a major planning study like the Eastern Corridor. I just want to give you a couple of quick slides out of there to share that we did a survey of folks in the area for that project, which was a huge study area. And biking and walking options was the 3rd most popular thing that came out of that, which, it was always part of the plan, but to hear people say that, look, this is a high priority for us was important to hear. And so we did a couple extra things with that study that I think were really helpful. We organized a professional bike ride with Yay Bikes and some of our local agencies, and that was really helpful to see the experience firsthand, and it helped inform our designs down the road. And just on that study, a couple of highlights was, we had nearly 70 concepts that we recommended. They're mostly performance-based project development type projects, but 18 of those were bike ped concepts. So a big percentage was hitting that desire. Next example comes from it's from District 7. This was a Shelby County Engineers Office project that received funding through ODOT's abbreviated safety application process. And as you can see in this picture, the existing shoulder was very narrow, and there really was, hardly any room for cyclists to travel on this section, and it's part of US Bike Route 25. So the project was under construction in 2020, and with this investment of lining up an abbreviated safety project with this US Bike Route, there will now be 4-foot shoulders along the entire project length. So another great example. Okay, so the next big point, you've got coordinating with your preservation projects. Next is screening for bike-related crash trends. And you can obviously do that in a high-tech way and look to ODOT's priority rankings. But if it also is effective, in my opinion, as we're trying to get towards 0 deaths as an agency. Just look where you have the most, because fortunately, bike-related crashes, typically, there's not a ton of them. So what I did here was we just mapped our ODOT maintained network in District 8, and we found 3 different concentrations. The one to the upper left of the screen is US 27. Not a lot of opportunities there to make easy changes, but down to the bottom right, there's that straight line with a few. We had a paving project coming through that I'll show you. We were able to take advantage of that opportunity and make an improvement. And then unfortunately, we had 2 cyclist fatalities along US 52, which is also US Bike Route 21. So, just mapping your data and just eyeballing it is effective. It doesn't have to be super sophisticated. And so example, on that State Route 125 concentration, we had 5 12-foot lanes with 5-foot shoulders. And also, it's a high crash area with high speeds too. So what we decided to do was narrow up the lanes. We still kept a 12-foot lane because we certainly have trucks in that area. But we also were able to put in a bike lane, separated bike lane. So that was a big win. And, the township was a huge player in that because that was part of their vision for the corridor anyway. So we worked together on that. Moving forward down to that US 52 spot, tragically we had 2 cyclists fatalities within 18 months. And, same township actually was pursuing a long-term fix of creating a separated trail, but it's years away. We're talking $5, $6, $7 million plus for that type of facility, and there's no funds for it. So, as an interim fix, we implemented a bike lane in this area. It's a separated bike lane. Not the ideal place for a bike lane. I wouldn't necessarily go out with my fam, but cyclists are out there now. And by implementing that, we were also able to put in a rumble strip to help provide additional protection. Finally, another one from District 7. This is another great example of just looking and finding those funding sources that are out there. In this case, in Springfield, this was a section of the Little Miami Trail where the local government applied for and picked up some CMAQ dollars. And this project was completed in 2015, and they're able to get a nice stretch of trail that was between 2 existing trails, so making those connections. Finally, there's a real desire for leadership throughout the state for these type of investments. And, just as an example, I've shared some examples from District 8. We don't have tons of bike lanes that we have out there, but we will have about 37 lane miles of bike lanes by 2021, just with 3 projects that we've implemented. And in 2018, Tri-State Trails, which is a local bike advocate group, a very effective and amazing group in the Cincinnati area, really adept at pulling everybody together. But they gave District 8 an award for Trail Organization of the Year, which we were really flattered to get. And I think there's so much more that other agencies do that, again, we were flattered to have it. And I think the reason I'm sharing with you today is that just begin, just start. And if you make these investments, folks will be appreciative because there's a desire to use it. So in summary, thank you very much for the time today. I know I'm just a little bit over 18 minutes here, but there's my contact info for District 8 as well as Mary Hoy. So please feel free to hit us up if you have any questions or just want to spitball some ideas. Thanks, and I'll turn it over to the next presenter.
All right, thanks, Tommy. Well, we do have a couple of questions that came in for you, so let's try and hit one of those anyways as we're transitioning to the next presentation. So one of the questions that we got, Andy, and I thought this was, or Tommy, and I thought this was a really good question. All these bike routes, state and U.S. bike routes that are being designated, the question was, did any of the planners, designers, creators of this system go out and inspect, ride these routes before they were finalized?
Yeah, that is a great question. And, you know I can speak for District 8 that, we did work closely with some of our bike advocates as well. So it's not just ODOT picking the routes or saying this one is good or not good. But yeah, we do inspect them, Google first, and then go out, take a drive. I would say we probably haven't ridden them on bikes as often as maybe we'd like to. And I will say that some of the bike routes, some are easy rides. They're on separated paths, which are great, and others are on the road. And Kate, I think, had a slide yesterday that talked about what percentage of folks are willing to ride on the road, and it is a small percentage of folks that are going to be those gung-ho folks out on the road. And I'm not sure how many of those are ODOTers per se. I know I have done it myself and was, it can be nerve-wracking. And so I think that's a great point. I think it's good to do that. And if nothing else, if you're not comfortable as a practitioner, it's good to at least get out there and get your eyes on it and drive it.
Yeah. Are you aware of any of the routes that changed? When they were inspected, they went out and looked at it and said, you know what, this may look good on a map, but laying eyes on that route, this probably isn't the best place to designate a route. Did any of the routes change? Not that you have to tell us which ones, but are you aware of any of them that had changed from what they were originally designed?
Yeah, so absolutely. And in fact, we've had some, that we implemented that we thought were good at the time. And then after they were out there, we thought, you know what, now that we see it and we get some experience with it, maybe let's change it now. So we've definitely changed some in advance. And then we've changed them even after being implemented. And sometimes that comes from us reviewing it as an agency. Other times it comes from a local government saying, I want to align this with my planning efforts, in a better way now that things evolve. And that's the great thing about this process is that, we're just beginning and we have a way to evolve and keep going with it. Great.
Well, Tommy, don't go away. There's some other questions for you, but we'll try to get to those here at the end. So thank you, Tommy.
Thank you.
All right, so our next presentation is going to be from Jeremy Thompson on the ODOT, and it's a tag team presentation between Jeremy and Andy Shahan. ODOT Pedestrian Safety Improvement Program, what we've done and where we're going. And so the first part of this is Jeremy Thompson. Jeremy is a traffic engineer in ODOT's Highway Safety Program. His primary duties involve managing local safety assistance program and assisting with many of ODOT's active transportation initiatives, including overseeing the Pedestrian Safety Improvement Program. Jeremy spent 2 years working in ODOT traffic operations, dealing with traffic signals, ramp meters, and operations and analysis, before transitioning to his current role in the Office of Program Management earlier this year. He's a 2017 graduate of The Ohio State University, enjoys going to concerts, music festivals, running, and camping in his free time. So Jeremy, thanks for sharing with us today.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. As he mentioned, I'm going to be sharing about ODOT's Pedestrian Safety Improvement Program. So kind of switching gears from bikes to pets here. Just a quick overview. I'll first highlight the need of the program. So I'll just give some background, some data analysis we did up front. Then I'll shift into just kind of the overview, how we selected agencies and how we allowed these agencies to select certain sites and certain countermeasures. And then I'll shift to Andy, and he'll go through project development and design. So starting with the program need, Ohio saw a 60% increase in the number of pedestrian-related fatalities from 2009 to 2018, and a 15% increase in the number of serious injuries. And in 2019, we saw 120 pedestrian fatalities on Ohio's roadways. But right now, in 2020, we are well on our way to beat that number, unfortunately. Through the end of September, we had 113 fatalities so far this year. So we're entering in the months where it gets dark earlier, so these are usually our worst months for pedestrian fatalities. So it won't be surprising to see that number hit 150 or 160 by the end of the year. So seeing this alarming trend of increased pedestrian fatalities, we shifted gears to focus on where severe crashes are occurring within the state. Between 2014 and 2018, 10 counties accounted for 65% of all pedestrian fatalities in Ohio. And as you might expect, these 10 counties include many of the major population centers within the state. We also noticed that pedestrian fatal and serious injury crashes were also overrepresented on our locally maintained roads, particularly in cities. Just under 70% of all of Ohio pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries occur in cities. So seeing that trend and seeing the overrepresentation in cities, we next looked into roadway classification. After taking this dive, we found that although arterials only make up 7 to 8% of our entire network in the state, they account for almost 55% of our pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries. And 4-lane arterials are particularly overrepresented. So moving into the program itself, we used all this data just to figure out why we needed to do something. So then doing something, we started the Pedestrian Safety Improvement Program, where we provided eligible high-risk jurisdictions funding and technical assistance to implement proven low to medium cost pedestrian safety countermeasures along those high-risk facilities. We started with $10 million in construction total. With 8 participants, we allocated that $10 million based off crash numbers. So we took the fatal and serious injury crash numbers on the screen and kind of divvied up that $10 million amongst these 8 cities and got to this allocation. We started with $500,000 as a base, and then based off those crash numbers, we assigned a need allocation to reach up to that total $10 million. Moving into location selection, once we invited these cities to participate, all of them said yes, and we handed them a spreadsheet and said, go pick your locations and pick what countermeasures you want implemented at those locations. So some of the criteria that we gave them at the beginning was any location must be on an arterial or collector, and right-of-way cannot be purchased through this program. And that's mainly because we wanted to streamline the process from planning to design to construction. And right now we're on pace to go from the date we invited these cities to when we break ground with construction. It'll be around 18 months, which is not something we typically see. The countermeasures that were eligible through this program, some more medium cost, intense countermeasures that affected roadway geometry, like pedestrian refuge islands, raised crosswalks, curb extensions, pedestrian hybrid beacons was another big one. And then we also had some lower cost countermeasures like pavement markings and signage that were used for this program. And these were heavily drawn from FHWA's STEP initiative, Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian, where they have a spectacular 7 suite of countermeasures. And we drew 5 of those 7 countermeasures, with the other 2 being road diets and leading pedestrian intervals. And while we fully endorse those, they just didn't necessarily fit into the streamlined molding of this program. So like I said, we provided a spreadsheet to each city to track locations and countermeasure. And that spreadsheet also calculated a preliminary estimate, and it was very preliminary. So once that was filled out, our task order consultant, Andy's the project manager of that group, conducted a field review to determine whether or not the countermeasures that were selected were appropriate for each location. And then with that, a more detailed estimate, so we could move into design with a kind of knowing where we were at construction funding wise, and we had a firm list of locations and countermeasures after that field review. So while we know this program was streamlined and new to the agency and everyone involved. It follows a pretty standard construction schedule. We go from planning to preliminary engineering to environmental engineering, and then to final engineering and detailed design, straight into construction. Just each of these phases were kind of sped up and done in a different way than we normally see. J&D will get into. So in the end, we have over 450 locations set to be constructed in 2021, and amongst those 450 locations, there are over 2,000 individual treatments happening. So it's very exciting, and we really hope to implement a second phase of this once we kind of take what knowledge we've gained from this first part of it, and continue this streamlined process, because systemic improvements like this, the whole of all these treatments is greater than the sum of the individual parts. We truly believe that. And with that, I will pass it to Andy to go through some of the more detail-oriented stuff of this program.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. Well, let me introduce then Andy to our audience today. So Andy Shahan is a principal and project manager with LJB. He's got 22 years experience specializing in transportation and public infrastructure design and field survey. He's a certified project manager with the Project Management Institute, and he's led projects ranging in construction costs from $50,000 all the way up to $110 million for Ohio municipalities, ODOT, and the Department of Defense. He served as a project manager on 2 statewide safety study contracts, 2 statewide safety design contracts, and a statewide bicycle and pedestrian design contract. In addition, I guess with his free time, what little he has, he's a varsity softball coach at Dayton Christian High School, and Andy and his wife, Katrina, have 4 children between the ages of 7 and 21. And that pretty much keeps them busy watching softball, baseball, basketball, soccer, volleyball, and football games year round. So, Andy, appreciate you making time to talk to us today. Thank you.
Pleasure, Scott. I want to make sure that everybody is seeing the appropriate screen here. So,
yep, we got you.
Got me. Excellent. Well, thank you for including me in this panelist. And Jeremy, I appreciate the introduction of the program. And really, what I want to do is take what you've just talked about and build upon it, and talk about, in effect, how we streamline the process to get these systemic improvements in the ground, and as in a schedule that you mentioned was 18 months long. You know, our consultant team for the pilot phase of this program included LJB and several other teammates, subject matter experts that we brought along to help deliver. Burgess and Neipel, 2LMN, Lawhon and Associates, and Tool Design Group. We're all part of trying to implement this pilot phase across the 8 cities in Ohio. Initially, we knew we needed to organize a couple meetings to collect some feedback, and then also set some direction on how we might be able to streamline the project development process. The first meeting that we had was actually with the districts, and we looked to not only introduce the program to the districts, but also to collect some feedback on potential barriers that they may see to quickly implementing these pedestrian safety countermeasures. The second meeting was with central office, and that was inclusive of roadway engineering and environmental services and the construction arm of ODOT to really look to brainstorm ideas for how we might streamline our project development process in support of the project sale in early 2021 across all 8 cities. And so those meetings are very important because they really kind of set the stage for how we were going to get from the application process that the cities were all highly engaged in to improvements, actually constructed. So at the meeting with central office, which occurred in March of this year, we really had 3 strategies that we confirmed for expediting a systemic approach to these safety countermeasures. The first really involved alternative construction plan formats and getting buy-in from ODOT on not only the alternative construction plan formats, but also a single design submittal that would be reviewed by the stakeholders. Second strategy was related to NEPA compliance, and we used really a citywide batched assessment of environmental resource impacts by similar countermeasure, and use that as a way to address NEPA compliance across multiple locations in a city. And lastly, we talked about a strategy relative to utility risks that everybody identified was going to be something that could interfere with the implementation as we had planned it with the actual construction phases of the project. So I mentioned the strategy relative to alternative construction plan formats. LJB's approach really segregated design and construction plan formats by the type of countermeasure. We leveraged simplified plans in the L&D for quantity-based type countermeasures. We also created what we call diagrammatic plans for countermeasures that would benefit from a plan view to demonstrate the intent of the contractor. And then lastly, we'd have detailed design plans for countermeasures with ground disturbance or more specifically ground penetration. These plan formats that were developed with a single submittal for review in mind. We coined it the preliminary submittal, and that was given to the cities and the district with the purpose of confirming countermeasures and the locations that were identified in that application process, and that they remained consistent with the funding that was budgeted and allocated for each of the cities. This was really intended to be a review that was going to serve as a checkpoint for us to potentially remove or add locations that were prioritized by each of the cities if budget constraints, were deemed necessary. So here's an example, and I'm going to zoom in for us here of what was a diagrammatic plan format, because many of you are probably wondering what does that mean. It's a word that we made up as we look to streamline plan development. And essentially what we decided was there were certain countermeasures that we felt like just quantities in the plans was not sufficient. We needed to be able to show a picture so that the contractor had the understanding of the intent of what we were trying to, what countermeasure we were trying to implement. Well, at the same time, we also knew that it wasn't really all that valuable to do a bunch of field survey. And so we had examples of countermeasures here that I wanted to share with you, like things like pavement markings for crosswalks. You might even see curb or curb ramps, and how we identified those were just with basic labels and some location coordinates with some simple dimensions for things that we were replacing to improve the pedestrian safety at that location. And so that was a unique plan format for what we have done conventionally as designers. I mentioned NEPA clearance strategy was something that we discussed early on, and there was a commitment that we would identify one project PID per district. And what that allowed us to do was batch the assessment of similar countermeasures within that CE document. Our team also enhanced the funding application spreadsheet for use in the CE document to support that batched review of environmental resources. The countermeasures that we implemented were done in a way that public involvement could be limited to public notifications and property owner letters. We weren't trying to avoid a public meeting, but we knew that if we implemented a countermeasure that drew us to a public meeting, that was going to extend our schedule. And we were really focused on trying to get to construction in early 2021. So here's just a screen grab of what that spreadsheet looked like. You can see there that we have environmental screening factors that we had identified for different countermeasure types. And then we looked at those, across each city. This was really an integrated process of environmental resource reviews and clearance with the design team. It was iterative. As design evolved, we made sure that our environmental team was understanding of what the impacts of our design might look like. Once the environmental study and the document was complete, our design team actually treated that as a constraint to avoid one location or changes in the design of one location delaying implementation of the rest of the project. So early on in the meeting in March with Central Office, ODOT identified utility risk as a major red flag for implementing countermeasures. The team in the meeting agreed to sharing that risk between both the design and construction phases of project development. So a tool that designers were given was access to the statewide subsurface utility locating contract when our field reviews by our subject matter experts determined that subsurface utility locating was warranted. We also acknowledged that in a systemic improvement mindset, some of the risk was going to need to be assigned to the construction phase. And ways that we did that, we have potholing requirements built into general notes for certain countermeasures, as well as an understanding that there's a need for the ODOT construction administration, the engineering in the field, along with the contractor, to be ready to make field adjustments to avoid utilities that aren't where we expect them to be, or even potentially meet ADA requirements when those field adjustments needed to be made. So as we launched into our design process, we were very cognizant of the importance of converting the work that was completed by the cities during the funding application phase to implementation during construction. And one way we streamlined that was engaging our pedestrian safety subject matter expertise, who also helped with the application process with that field review and providing real-time design decisions for both the simplified and the diagrammatic plan formats. Similarly, we paired that subject matter expertise with our data collection and field surveyor in the field, and this was done to limit field survey to only what was needed for the countermeasure. In other words, why survey all four corners of a location in an intersection if we're only replacing the ramp on a single corner, right? And so we wanted to try to be very efficient with our data collection to constrain the costs in the design phase. Another interesting thing to note here on the survey side was that we collected all of the information on the state plane grid coordinates. And what that allowed us to do is go out and actually field locate utility markings for diagrammatic plan locations, which were only going to be shown on statewide imagery. The two would be able to lay on top of one another and be geo-referenced to one another. We could also then use that statewide imagery in our detailed plan formats too, to kind of augment the field survey that was done for those countermeasures. Really helped us be efficient with preparing one base map citywide, and in the case of District 4, across multiple cities. So I'll wrap up here with just a couple of perspectives on lessons learned. We're in the middle of many of these, on the tail end of what we're doing in District 4, but in the thick of it, District 8, 2, and 7, and 12 in District 6. One of the things that I think we learned is that we need to make sure that we are really engaging the district reviewers early in the process, because the intent of a preliminary submittal and what's logged in Ellis as a stage 3 submittal really didn't marry up. And so that was a cause for a lot of comments from the reviewers. And I think better communication and engagement with the district's reviewers at kickoff would help streamline the review times that we had. Second lesson learned, in future phases of the program, we need to make sure that we're continuing to reinforce with each city that the application process is the right time for determining countermeasures and locations, which is code for make sure you're investing enough time in the design thought then at that point, because once we get into design, we're making decisions on the plan format. Are we going to get survey or are we not going to get survey? And if we get into design and we realize that this location, we want to do something different, we don't want to hold hostage this, all the other locations for the decisions that need to be made or want to be made at a specific location. And so making sure that we understand that we really need to put good thought into that application process, so the countermeasure and the location are what we really indeed want. So that's all I've got, Scott. I'm going to.
Great, thank you, Andy.
Yeah.
So just looking at the clock and taking a peek here, and I think that we have time for a question here. So here's one that we got in. I guess either you or Jeremy can take this, but as we approach the construction phase for the inaugural round of this program, what are some of your top lessons learned? I think you just shared that, and then also, you know, as the program moves forward, what are we going to try and do differently?
Jeremy, did you have any thing to add to the lessons learned that I shared just there at the end of our presentation? Anything that you've taken away from a program level that?
Those have been the big hitters. Just it really reiterating that additional work in like the planning and preliminary engineering phases. That would make the process go much smoother. And just as we move towards final tracings over the next couple of months, and then construction in 3 or 4 months, we're gonna basically jot down this list and start brainstorming the next phase. But the ones Andy mentioned were the highlights for sure.
Okay, well, I started with that one, but we have a couple other longer questions in here, so we'll save those to the end. So don't go anywhere. But Jeremy, Andy, thank you. At this point, we're going to kick it over to Mario Coleman, and she's going to be talking about pedestrian and bicycle safety at interchanges, alternative intersections, and roundabouts. Mariel is both a planner and engineer with Tool Design Group here in Columbus, Ohio. She's focused her career on accessible and multimodal solutions for all ages and all abilities. Her industry experience includes bicycle and pedestrian design, green streets and stormwater projects, design guide development, traffic calming, and public engagement. Mariel is also lead in training for FHWA Bicycle Facility Selection Guide and Bicycle Facility Design Implementation for multidisciplinary groups that want to take that training. She's currently leading a pedestrian improvement rapid implementation project for ODOT. And as noted earlier, she's a deputy project manager on development of ODOT's first standalone multimodal design guide. So with that, I will turn it over to Mariel.
All right, thank you, Scott. Let me get all my windows consolidated here. All right, so my name is Mariel Coleman, and I am a planner and designer at Tool Design. And we design and plan multimodal facilities in a variety of contexts, urban and rural, and in particular, pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facility design. We also evaluate projects, preferably at the conceptual level, because that's, you know, when it's easiest to change things for safety. But we also evaluate safety along roadways and intersections. And that's what this talk today will be to walk you through a little bit of that high level concept process that we go through when we're evaluating intersections, alternative interchanges, and roundabouts. And then we've also authored a lot of national, state, and local design guidance, including several from FHWA. There was a recent one on intersection safety for bike and ped design, the Bikeway Facility Selection Guide. We authored the current AASHTO guide and the forthcoming AASHTO Bike Design Guide, and then numerous NCHRP reports. Obviously, we're working with ODOT currently to develop a multimodal design guide, and we have other ongoing efforts with Texas DOT, Minnesota DOT, LA DOT, several DOTs throughout the country as well. All right, so we have found a lot of different ways to put two roadways together, different types of intersections, interchanges, roundabouts in terms of layout and size. And if you're not a highway designer or even engineer for that matter, that's okay, because I've made this I've structured this talk so that hopefully it's accessible for all of you, because we really need all of our practitioners working to make walking and biking safe. And really the way we approach, our basic 3 or 4-way intersection is not that dissimilar from how we approach some more complex intersections as well. In the last couple of decades, we've also started to see some newer intersection types. I have the last 4 are some examples of those. And these have sought to improve safety through safety and operations, really, by reducing conflicts and redistributing volumes. And in some ways that can also benefit pedestrians and bicyclists, but in some ways it may also degrade comfort and safety. And I've got my pet assistant that might try to help a little bit today. Apologies. Come here, buddy. All right.
Never fails when you get on camera. That's what the pet does. It never fails.
He loves presentations. He just wants to be a part of it.
Somehow they know. They just know.
They really do. All right. So recent designs, these have been dreamed up to improve safety in operations. And this NCHRP report, which we've helped work on, has it's in publication. It is completed, not quite available yet, but it does a really fantastic job of walking you through the design principles, design treatments generally, and then it also does a couple of case studies on the last 4 intersections I have listed on this slide, and it has this very systematic process of checklist, and then shows you how to develop several alternatives, weigh the pros and cons, and then make a decision for your preferred alternative. As I mentioned, complex intersections are not that dissimilar from some of our intersection and interchanges that we see in a lot of locations. Things like on and off ramps and channelized right turns are present in these intersections as well. So there's some general concepts that together you can put them together to work on any of these intersections and improve safety for bikes and peds present at those. So I want to walk us through the design principles that this NCHRP report lays out, and they described their design principles in 3 succinct ways. If you look at some of the other FHWA guides, they're all really saying the same things. They encompass the same concepts. This one's just very concise. And one principle that I think isn't readily apparent from this list that is in some of those other guides is that NCHRP, FHWA all state that designers should assume bikes and peds will be present. Many locations in the past haven't been designed for bikes and peds, and they are unsafe because of those decisions that assumed those users probably wouldn't be present. And really, regardless of volumes in various contexts, we have a responsibility to make sure that everyone can use every intersection and they have safe and supportive infrastructure for their mode type. So jumping into these principles, the first one is routing and delay. And this one's particularly important for pedestrians and bicyclists who expend a lot more energy to move around. They're also much more exposed to the elements in a way that motorists are not. And extending walking or bicycling trips by prohibiting a crossing or using longer cycle lengths or having multi-stage crossings, especially for the sake of motorist convenience, can end up leading to riskier crossing behaviors. We see peds crossing either against traffic control devices or at locations that are unmarked. making it just generally unsafe for everyone at that intersection. We have peds crossing where motorists least expect them to. So we want to acknowledge the unique aspects of walking and biking and design around that. We see this in safety apps all the time, right? Like there's a crossing, but you know, somewhere 500 feet up the road is where everyone's trying to go. And so we can design safe crossings, but if they're not where people want to go, then our compliance starts to decline. And in terms of routing, this is a particularly good example because of the amount of crossings that this would entail and how that can impact a bicyclist or a pedestrian. So a person traveling north along the east side of this side street would have to make 1, 2, 3 crossings to just continue their direction of travel. And that's likely taking a full cycle length for them to do so. And we'd never ask a motorist to wait through 3 full cycle lengths just to get through an intersection. These are coordinated, so what they experience at this intersection is distinctly different than what a pedestrian would trying to cross just to continue along their path. So when we're looking at pedestrians and bicyclists, equal consideration should be given when assessing intersection performance metrics compared to motorists. Another thing to note about this configuration is I think this would be difficult to navigate. You know, plan view, we can see it, the path is marked, but someone that's not an engineer arriving here, this would be very confusing. And I could see someone thinking like, oh, well, if I can just cross here and then jump across here, I'll be where I need to go. And they don't understand this path. So it's not intuitive. And then when you add in someone with low or no vision, this is next to impossible to navigate without some assistance at this location. I will caveat this minimizing the use of multi-stage crossing with the exception that occasionally a multi-stage crossing can make sense if it actually reduces delay. So something like a bike box is a multi-stage crossing, but if there was no bike lane or no access through here, a bike would have to merge multiple lanes and go around. And so in that case, a bike box would be preferable. So just one caveat to that. These are 2 alternatives to the intersection I showed on the previous slide. You'll notice that they provide much more direct routes than the previous one. And it may even be possible to allow a pedestrian a single stage crossing, depending on the signal timing here, especially since in this one, the bottom right one, we've removed the left turns from the arterial. So now we've shortened the crossing a good bit as well. Maybe this one's still a little bit longer. But either way, this is a much more direct route. It's more intuitive. There's likely a reduction in delay overall. The second principle is comprised of a couple of different concepts. After we've provided our direct route with minimal delay, then we need to start looking at those crossing locations and where they're conflicting, where a pedestrian is crossing a motor vehicle path, and work to minimize or mitigate those conflicts. In some cases, we might be able to eliminate them entirely with something like a dynamic no turn on red, but oftentimes there's still permissive turns. There may be uncontrolled crossings as well. So as much as we can mitigate those conflicts. So the first kind of sub-bullet of this concept is maximizing visibility. So clear sight lines are always important, but one way we achieve that is by providing a perpendicular crossing. So you can see by adjusting the roadway geometry here and maybe adjusting the crossing a little bit, we've adjusted the driver's view shed so that they're able to see a pedestrian better on both sides of this crossing. Here's an example of that as well, where instead of having the pedestrian and bicyclist path continue parallel with the travel lanes, we've taken that crossing down perpendicular. The driver's able to see them. We've added some signage here. The other thing that this helps with is sometimes whenever we have, these couple of crossings and this driver is trying to merge into traffic, it's a lot for them to assess. So when we pull a crossing back a little bit, then they can focus on yielding for our pedestrian and bicyclist, and then they can move forward and assess a gap so that they can merge into this. And it's a similar principle at our roundabouts. If this was the exit to the roundabout, we also recess our crossings there as well, so that a motorist gets out of the roundabout and then they can have the time to see and react to a pedestrian or bicyclist crossing, and then have a sufficient waiting area to yield to them. The last thing to note about visibility is that I think nationally, it's around 75% of all pedestrian fatalities happen at night. So proper lighting, in particular at crossings, is really important to enhance visibility of pedestrians to drivers. This is a big one. If you focus on nothing else, this one can go a long way. When it comes to vehicle speeds, if we really want to achieve safe crossings, we can't keep doing business as usual. The standard practice has been to design intersection turns or entrance and off ramps, connecting two arterials that allow for vehicles to turn or merge without really slowing down. And when crossings are uncontrolled and speeds that start to exceed 20 miles per hour, so this is our 20 miles per hour, we get down to 30 miles per hour, we see yield rates drastically drop. And managing speeds, it does come down to roadway geometry. And it doesn't always require a complete redo. Alignments help, but there's some other countermeasures we can employ to manage speeds at turns and conflict points. And really, to put this simply, if we're not willing to reduce speeds at these conflict points, then we're not going to achieve safe crossings for pedestrians. So this is an area that I think we've started to do well at in our more two-lane four-way intersections, but we need to bring this. The concepts still apply, as I mentioned earlier. Those intersections, the safety issues at those, it's the same thing here. So we need to bring those concepts, some of those treatments forward to designing at interchanges and complex intersections as well. Intersection geometry would be the first place I would look. This type of angle allows for someone to just keep going. They don't really have to slow down, versus aligning at 90 degrees. Then to make that turn, you do have to slow down. This also advances the visibility goal to have your crossing at 90 degrees. And this can save right away if we're in a new construction type of project. When we are looking at an existing on or off ramp, though, we can use things like mountable truck aprons. In the past, sometimes our radiuses have been so large to allow for control vehicles to not encroach at all. And we can tighten that up. We can make these intersections control our design vehicles so that the majority of our vehicles are going at much slower speeds. And then the mountable truck aprons still allow for those larger vehicles. But in general, this is a much safer approach. And we've got a recessed crossing here again. So this isn't necessarily related to speed, but in terms of yielding rates, we know that when we recess a crossing around 6 to 20 feet, that's the sweet spot for a driver starting to turn. They have a better visibility because they're turning now, and then we have some space for them to react and wait for that crossing as well. If we start to recess it back much further though, we see vehicles speeding up into the turn. So then we don't get that reduced speed, higher visibility kind of sweet spot for these locations. Another treatment that really isn't appropriate where we have large vehicles, but may make sense at a roundabout, is a raised crossing as well. So those can reduce speeds. They're just not appropriate in all contexts. The third sub-bullet for managing conflicts with vehicles is to minimize the severity of the conflict, and that really just ties back to the last two of visibility and speed. That's how we can reduce the severity as our speed goes up. This is the classic graphic of what that means in terms of severity if a crash does occur. And some of the ways we can manage severity is through separation. So signal timing is how we can separate them in time. When we can provide separated bike facilities, that is preferred. There is a safety benefit to providing a bike lane over a shared facility. We can also reduce exposure by keeping our crossing distances short, which can also improve our signal timing. So I think I have an example here. So keeping that conflict area, if we have a right turn lane, this is also, at an intersection, keeping those crossing distances short as well. And then clearly marking that area that it is a bicycle space and they have the priority, but noting exactly where you want that conflict to occur can help improve safety. As I touched on earlier, in addition to making it a longer route, whenever some of these intersections have a displaced left turn or a restricted turn, bicyclists may have to merge across multiple lanes to make those turns, which is uncomfortable for bicyclists, especially our non-highly confident, which is a very small portion of the population. So finding ways such as the two-stage turn box or providing a access ramp off to a shared use path so that they can make those crossings without having to merge across multiple lanes is another good way of reducing severity. Providing adequate signal timing. Pedestrians, we want to target at least, or we want to target a 3.5 feet per second walking speed. That's more inclusive, accommodates more walking speeds. This is probably less common near an interchange or complex intersection, but context matters. So when a school is present or a senior center is present, we need to think about those things and recognize that the average walking speed might be lower at those locations. So just something to keep in mind as for your general intersection safety. And a couple of things to note about bicyclists in terms of characteristics. These graphics are really for more like a residential street intersecting with a collector where there might be kind of a short cycle. So minimum green times can't often accommodate bicyclists because they have a longer startup time. That might be less meaningful in some of these larger intersections, but worth noting that their just startup from a stop is different than a vehicle. Sometimes we have leading bike intervals that can let them establish themselves in that crossing as well, just so that they're more visible. And then the bike clearance interval is something to pay attention to, just because their speed is different. The regular clearance interval may end with a bicyclist not even halfway across the intersection before our conflicting movements are allowed to begin. And we want to make sure that they have gotten most of the way across the intersection so that they're finishing their crossing movement by the time a conflicting movement is starting to go as well. Maintaining bicycle facilities through an intersection. We could say this is an approach to an interchange. We at a minimum want to maintain what was already on the roadway. So if it was a bike lane, if it was a buffered bike lane, a separated bike lane, at a minimum maintain that. But in some contexts, it may make sense to actually elevate it or provide the option to use a separated facility. So in this case, there's a bike lane and there's good conflict markings through this entrance ramp, and the bike lane continues. But if a person's going through that and that's really uncomfortable for them to have cars crossing over, and there may be multiple instances of this throughout this interchange, then some bicyclists will already choose to ride on the sidewalk, and then that also degrades the comfort and safety of our pedestrians. So recognizing when that'll occur, higher speed, higher volume locations, and provide a point which they can exit and use a shared facility and make sure that it's wide enough to accommodate both bikes and peds. The one exception is obviously at roundabouts. We can't maintain a bike lane through a roundabout, but we can provide a separated facility. At single lane roundabouts, that might not be necessary. Often if those are designed to be really low speed, a shared facility might be appropriate. But when we get into multi-lane roundabouts, we want to provide an alternative route and also make sure that it's there because bicyclists will likely opt for that, and we don't want that to be at the expense of our pedestrians. The last example here is emerging and weaving area. Whether this is short or long, that can be really uncomfortable. So again, providing a way to exit and an alternative path through that would accommodate more users than the bike lane would. So moving on to our last design concept here is we talked about minimizing conflicts between peds and vehicles, bikes and vehicles, and now thinking about minimizing conflicts between peds and bikes. And I've touched on this a little bit throughout, obviously visibility again, but making sure we're providing separated bike lanes at locations with higher volumes of bicyclists and peds, recognizing that degrades safety and comfort for both users if we're not providing adequate facilities for both. If we are providing a separated bike lane, make sure that those crossings stay separated and don't combine them there. And in shared use paths, a minimum path width may be appropriate, but you can look at FHWA's shared use path calculator to start to understand when you should actually separate out a bidirectional path for bicyclists and pedestrians. So that's wraps up the concepts. Just to touch a little bit on, to get you excited about the NCHRP report. This is a list of the design treatments that then that report walks you through after it walks you through all the concepts I just went through. And if you look at this list, you'll see like there's refuge islands, there's offset crossings, raised crossings, left turn treatments. These are all things you're already seeing in other design guidance. So again, to reiterate that you have the tools at your fingertips now to make intersections and interchanges and roundabouts safe places for bikes and peds. And then the last highlight from this guide is this is their design flag treatment process. So they walk you through each of these possible scenarios so that you can evaluate your individual intersection and flag it as such, and then talk about design treatments for these potential issues. The things I want you to walk away with today is that we should always be assuming bikes and peds will be present, and that you don't have to know how to design a fancy interchange to know how to critically look at it from a bike and ped standpoint and make it a safer place. Key concepts are keeping routes short with minimal delay, minimizing conflicts, and in particular, reducing motor vehicle speeds where those conflicts occur. I'll leave you with a couple of resources here. There is the report I mentioned that's getting published in a day. This is an existing report. I have definitely not included any real discussion on accessibility. So that's a whole nother discussion, and I would encourage you to seek some of that information out. There's an ITE guide if you have access to that. And then some of our existing, these are not necessarily talking about complex intersections, but these are where the treatments that I talked about are also discussed that would apply in really any intersection as appropriate. And with that, I am happy to answer questions. I know some of the intersection questions can be very visual, so if you'd prefer to send me a painted up Google Earth drawing to ask something, I'm always happy to answer, and my email is on the screen.
Great. Thank you, Mario. Appreciate that. That was very, as you said, visual and really helps, I think, our audience see just some of the real practical concerns that we have as we design our roadway network to make sure that we're accommodating all users. So at this point, we have some time left in our session, and so we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A here, and so I'm going to pass questions around. Really like to thank those attending the session. You guys have sent in a lot of questions, some really good ones, and so I'm going to pass it around here. And so my next question is for Tommy. Tommy, perfect time, turning the camera on. And so one question we have is that, you know, we've heard that excessive speed is one of the contributing factors to the increased number of fatalities that we're having this year on our roads. Even though we have fewer people on the road, VMT is down, speeds have increased. And that seems to be one of the leading causes of crashes and fatalities on our roadway system. Might that increased speed also be one of the leading causes for pedestrian and bike crashes too, you know, during this COVID time?
Definitely. And, you know, I think Mariel really covered that well too in her slides, that she had all the great graphs and, you know, that show how much speed plays a role, and especially the severity of these types of crashes. And yeah, I don't know if Jeremy has any stats, but definitely we're seeing that speeds are increased during, you know, the lower traffic volume, maybe just because there's less congestion. But also we've seen a bigger increase in excessive speed. So, you know, some of those riskier behaviors seem to be a little bit more prevalent right now. So every time our babysitter leaves the house, I'm like, watch out for crazies, because you just know that you can feel it out there sometimes. It's out there. So be careful, everybody on this call.
Exactly. And you know, it just seems so counterintuitive, because with fewer people on the road, we would expect things to be safer. And it's just the opposite right now. So, okay. So another question that came in, and I'll throw this out for anyone here on the panel that wants to try and tackle this. But one of the things that we hear about is like most of the crashes that happen for bicyclists happen during the day, during daylight hours. Is there anything that is in the Ohio Revised Code or that you're aware of that talks about minimum equipment or safety equipment on a bicycle or for a bicyclist as they hit the road? And beyond that, you know, what's required by the law, anything that is recommended for people who are out riding around to help keep them safe as they're riding on a shared facility with vehicles.
I'd recommend dyeing your hair red or orange would be the first thing.
Well, I was thinking of ODOT green. ODOT green stood out better, but okay, red or orange, we'll go with that.
Yeah, you know, I don't. Jeremy was shaking his head there too. I believe there's a requirement to have a vehicle because a bicycle is a vehicle on the road. When you're in the road, you should have a red light on the back of your bike and a white light on the front, just like a car.
Yep.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
Yep.
But I mean, yeah, I think that's a great point that visibility, it's hard to see bicyclists, and that's an area we could improve in countrywide, really. We're seeing some other countries establish much more stringent rules on what those lights have to look like, and even the strength of the lights on the bike lights, because some of them are, you know, we pass them out at conferences and they're not the best bike lights.
Yeah, and while when this question came in, I also kind of went on the side and phoned a friend and reached out to Kate Harley, and she also had the same response that you all did, that, you know, when they're required to have the light and the red reflector in the back or light, but that's the minimum. But, you know, if it takes dyeing your hair red or orange, then, you know, whatever, to try and keep people safe. So now a similar question, we'll make this the last question, and I'll throw it out again to the group. You know, for a lot of us, a lot of the pedestrian crashes are happening near the curbside. So maybe it's through parking or site distance issues. So, you know, from the panel here, should we be considering reaction time, stopping site distance in parking areas where, you know, sight lines are obstructed, you know, for small kids? Because, you know, Tommy, you talked about, you know, you got 3 under the age of 8. I remember when mine were that age, you know, and they don't want to hold mom and dad's hand, right? And all you can just see is them darting out in between a car and all that. So, you know, any, you know, maybe for on-street parking, you know, is there any design guides that we can help in designers in those sorts of situations to help see pedestrians better when sight lines are obstructed by parked vehicles?
So I can just jump in on the multimodal design guide, and maybe Mario can as well. But sight distance is a prominent subject in chapter 3 of the draft guide, elements of design. So both stopping sight distance and intersection sight distance are covered there, and it breaks down the recognition zone, the decision zone, and yielding and stopping with a bunch of figures and tables of sight lines and offsets and all that kind of thing. So that will be a pretty big chunk of the elements of design chapter in the multimodal design guide. I'm not sure what out there is existing to help with that, but just wanted to add that.
Well, and since you brought that up, I'm going to throw a bonus question in here. We did have a question. As that guide is being developed, is it going to be released for comment, either maybe not to the public, but to the design community for folks to take a look at that, maybe comment on that?
So we weren't, I know the question was specific to the public review, so we weren't planning on sending out for any further public reviews. As I mentioned in the presentation, we involved quite a few public agencies up front to get their priorities and preferences of what they want to see in the guide. But ultimately the content development is on the TAC, which is a bunch of people across ODOT to get as many perspectives and as possible to go into that guide. But once released, I mean, if there's issues, or we're always open to hearing suggestions and making adjustments as needed. So once it's out there.
Great. Well, thank you, Brent, and thank you to all of our presenters today, and for the audience who dialed in to listen to this. Really appreciate the interest in this. if we were presenting this presentation in person at the convention center like a normal year, we would probably get about 20% of the audience that we had today. We had a much bigger audience than normal, and just so happy that people decided to hear about this, because this is important to making sure our transportation system is safe for all users, particularly the most vulnerable. So appreciate your time, appreciate the audience's time, and at this point we're going to wrap this up, and I'm going to kick it back to Victoria. Any closing words for the audience today?
Nope, just thank you for joining, and we'll hopefully see you on another OTEC session shortly. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.